In this video, I'm going to cover the basic data and workflows of how information is exchanged between your Katana and Xero account through this integration setup. Now, it's very straightforward, but it's very foundational and important that you have at least a high-level understanding of how the information works between these two softwares. So that way, for your specific setup, you're better set up for success and less for failure. So I'll go ahead and explain kind of how the data flows in and flows out between the two, and we'll try to keep it as simple as possible. So firstly, an integration has to go through a couple of steps before you can actually start using it. So information flows at the beginning during setup, and then information flows after you're already connected. Now, since you have to connect to Xero directly through your Katana account, then you'll need to look at it from the perspective of Katana. So for starters, you can see that what I have here is Katana and Xero, and then different types of items, and then different types of actions, and what is the trigger and action mechanism between that type of workflow. Now, when you do the first setup with your Katana account, the only information that flows into Katana comes directly from Xero. So it's very simple and straightforward. You connect to Xero, and then Katana imports existing contacts, which includes suppliers and customers. So customers are what you put on your sales orders, and suppliers are what you put on your purchase orders. Those contacts flow into your Katana contact section, and they're separated by supplier and customer. And those are what are eligible to be added to sales orders and purchase orders anytime you make those documents in the future in Katana using pre-existing data from your Xero account. That's pretty much all it is. Super straightforward. The contact information that flows over includes the names and email addresses and any other associated contact data with those records that Katana could also use. Now, once you have already completed the setup process, then we start getting into the workflows. And the way Katana works with Xero is you can take a sales order and create an invoice, or you can take a purchase order and create a bill. Now, the way this works is when the integration is set up, there's going to be a brand new column on your sell and buy screens. And that column will be for sales orders, create invoice, or for purchase orders, create bill. The same also applies for outsourced purchase orders. And in order for Katana to send any information over to Xero, you must click that button in order to create an invoice in Xero from a sales order. So you'll choose the button on the sales order, create an invoice in Xero. And then it sends that information and it generates the document in your Xero account and links it directly to your Katana account. Also, for purchase orders, once you press the button for creating a bill, it will send over a bill in Xero. So it's also very straightforward. So whenever it comes to making those documents, there are some other procedures that you have to also be aware of and ensure that you can use as well. There's what we call match criteria. Now, items on your Katana account will include materials as well as products. And every single one of those items has a product name and, generally speaking, an SKU. So anytime you're generating one of these documents, such as an invoice or a bill, you're going to have items inside of those documents on the sales order and purchase order. And when the item gets sent over into your Xero account, it's going to look for a match. And so if, for example, you have an item on one of those sales or purchase orders, and it will find a matching name or SKU for the linked item in Xero, it will add it directly to that invoice or that bill. If it doesn't find a match, then it will actually create what's called a non-inventory item. Of course, you'll have to allocate that correctly in your Xero account later, but it will be added. And you can continue to use that in the future. So it is possible for you to create new items on your Xero account if those items do not pre-exist. But first, Katana will always try to find a match prior to adding it to one of these types of items here, the invoice or the bill from one of these documents in Katana. Now, the next thing is customers and suppliers. Now, at the very beginning, when you're using Xero, of course, you're importing these contacts over as customers and suppliers into Katana. But you might come across situations where you're adding a new supplier into Katana and you're adding a new customer into Katana, but neither of those contact types have ever had an invoice issued for them or a bill issued for them in your accounting software. So generally speaking, anytime you're making a sales order and pushing it over as an invoice, there will be a customer on it, and anytime you're generating a purchase order and sending it over as a bill, there will also be a supplier on it. Now, if you've added those for the first time inside of your Katana account, and it doesn't find a match for that contact in Xero, then what Katana will do is it will create a new contact with the details that you've added on the Katana side. Generally speaking, this consists primarily of a name and also an email address. And anytime that those new documents are generated in your Xero account from a Katana document, then those new contacts will be added in those types of cases. Lastly, there's also a matching that's related to tax rates. Now, tax rates are not imported for this type of use case, but if you're generating a sales order or a purchase order and there is a tax that's in Katana, it will be mapped to an existing tax in Xero. And that mapping is also done during the setup process. And that way, whenever you are generating a invoice or a bill from an existing sales order or purchase order or outsourced purchase order, then it will find the correct corresponding mapped tax rate on your Xero accounting platform in order to provide an accurate match. So that way the invoice and bill that's being made from it is also accurate. If it doesn't find a match, you can also go ahead and add one and map it by reconfiguring your connection. So those are a couple of ways in how the data is flowing from Katana to Xero. So this should give you a nice little overview and basic idea of how it works. So that way you would be able to successfully start running through the integration setup properly and also do the workflows correctly.